Fear Not, Episode 43. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today you and I are going to be joined by Dr. Connie Henson. Welcome, Connie. How are you today?
I'm great, Billy. Thank you.
Are you ready to fear not today?
I am ready to fear not.
Okay, great. Dr. Connie Henson is the author of Brainwise Leadership, Practical Neuroscience to Survive and Thrive at Work. A lively presenter, Connie's passion for the science of how people work enables her to apply the most current research and techniques in a way that is both practical and entertaining. Her talks encourage high interaction and quickly get people thinking and working differently. Connie also designs and implements change leadership programs that are informed by the latest neuroscience research through her company, Learning Quest, which is a Sydney-based applied psychology and leadership development consultancy. Connie, can you take a few seconds to fill in the gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I think probably what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about a little bit more about my background because I think it really informs how I think about dealing with fear and dealing with changes. I started out my career as a clinician, a health psychologist. And so I specialized in working with people who had really significant medical challenges, things like brain injuries, severe burns, spinal cord injuries, life-threatening illnesses. And those people had to make changes in their lives. They had really profound shifts that they had to make. And because I was up close and personal, I could see how they did it. And what I realized is that their mindset and the interpersonal environment around them had a huge impact on not just how they coped, but ultimately, how they dealt with other challenges in their lives as well, and how they healed, or in some cases, finished out their lives.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And would you also share with us one of the biggest fears that you've had to face?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I have a regular supply, probably like all of us. But I think for me, it's always a relative thing. As I said, I had the background in working with people who were very ill, and fairly early on, when I was through my therapy and talking with people who were often at the end of their lives and had regrets. And what I realized is the most common regret that people had was about things they hadn't done, the risks they hadn't taken, the relationship they hadn't pushed themselves into. And I realized that for me to get to that place was a bigger fear than the courage it would take to overcome taking risks. And I think that's probably driven my life ever since. I mean, I left clinical work many, many years ago and spend my time in business these days, but it still drives me to just take a chance, take a risk, make that connection with a person, because you just don't know when you're not going to have another chance. And I definitely don't want to end up feeling that regret.
So, what do you do that helps you to stay out of that fear of regret, or in fear in general? Actually, I'd be really curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of things, but one thing that is probably a pretty common theme for me is that I just acknowledge the fear that I have when I have it, name it, label it, describe it. I think it's a natural inclination for us to want to avoid thinking about it and pretend like it doesn't exist. But in fact, just, naming it and describing it, I think is the first step for being able to work with it.
And also, given your background, you surely must have come across some really great material on dealing with fear. Would you mind maybe sharing a couple examples with us today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Because a lot of my work is around making science really practical. I tend to think that if you can understand the science, understand what's happening, kind of that neurological level, it makes everything a bit easier. And so, for example, that technique I was just talking about, of labeling emotion or naming it, describing it, comes out of some research, actually some fairly recent research where neuroscientists using fMRI and other types of brain scanning have been able to see the shifts in activation in our brains when we label or describe the fears that we have. And that's because our brains are, they've been around for a very long time and basically programmed, if you will, to deal with the most important or urgent challenges first. And human brains, we will naturally think any kind of threat or danger is the most urgent challenge. And that's why when we're afraid, when we feel threatened, it's hard to think, it's hard to concentrate, it's hard to learn to think about complex things. But what they found is that when we do feel uncomfortable, when we feel afraid, if we simply say it out loud, or even write it or type it, it shifts that activation from the part of the brain that's protecting us, that's helping us deal with threat and danger, into the thinking part where we're able to problem solve and work with it. So that would be number one technique that I think is really really useful. Um, I'd be happy to share some others if we've got time for that.
Yes, of course, please.
Okay. So a couple of other things I think are really important. It's just, and it's along the same lines. It's just being mindful, being aware of what's happening in our environment, and recognizing um, fear when it's small, because often it can be a small anxiety or a small worry. And if we just are aware of it right away, then we're able to deal with it rather than avoiding it. We can figure out what it's about and try to do something about it. A third thing, kind of a different direction, would be I find just regular exercise is incredibly helpful. And again, based on science, is that when we feel, fear, when we feel stress in our, which we all do in our environments because they're just that way, it builds up a chemical in our body called cortisol, which is actually a pretty helpful chemical. If we need to move quickly or get away from danger or to protect ourselves. But if it builds up in our brain, it has some pretty negative impacts over the long term, and especially around decreasing our memory, our ability to learn, and increasing our sensitivity to fear. But exercise burns it up. And so having a regular exercise program for me is really, really useful. And I encourage it for my clients as well, particularly when they're going through changes or stress in their lives, just to get even small exercise can make a difference. Even just a few minutes of moving around helps change that chemical balance and that activation in our brains.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. There's nothing like a good cure like jogging.
Mm.
It works
Yeah.
for me.
And even, well, and Billy, even, because some of us would, like to do pretty active exercise, but even for those people who don't have a regular program, or maybe they struggle, even just a little bit of walking around your office, get up, move around, can make a huge difference. And I encourage people, don't feel like if you can't do 45 minutes every day of vigorous exercise, that's okay. I mean, I'd love for people to do that, but even the small stuff matters. It definitely helps.
Well, great, and thank you so much for sharing those resources. Are you ready for the speed run?
Sure.
Which individual, whether they be fiction or real, has made the most impact on your life?
So I've got two really. One is my husband. We've been together for almost 35 years. So the biggest part of my life, to be with an incredible person who I think is just really good at being in the moment and being present And it's in some ways the opposite of me because I tend to be in my head and in the future. And so he's been a really positive influence in that way and continues to be. The second would be Viktor Frankl, a psychologist, philosopher who has, wrote, enormously. But he talked about, I think the most profound thing for me is talked about we don't get to choose what happens in our lives or what happens to us, but we do get to choose our response. And again, I think that's probably, I read that early in my life and or at least in my early adulthood. And I always go back to that. I don't get to choose what happens. Good things, bad things, all kinds of things happen to all of us. But I can choose. I can choose my response. And I think that's pretty important.
If you could instantly change one thing in the world, what would that be?
I think I would make us all better able and willing to listen to each other. I think we all do a lot of talking and not a lot of listening, and the world would be a lot better if we did the listening.
What's your biggest weakness?
I think probably distraction. I can, if I could focus more, I'm sure my life would be probably happier and certainly more productive. But I'm interested in many, many things, and so I distract myself a lot.
What's your biggest strength?
Probably, what would be my biggest strength? Things. Well, in some ways, the strength is sort of the weakness too, because I am interested in everything and everybody. I have just almost an insatiable curiosity, and I want to learn about things and figure out different stuff and experience things. So I guess it's one of those double-edged swords in a way.
And if you could only have one book to read, what book would that be?
Wow, that's a tough one. Look, I think I can't think of a specific book, but it would probably be something that's has some humor in it. And if I only have one thing, I think I'd want to laugh, and so something that would make me laugh.
Do you have a favorite sound?
Most nature sounds I really enjoy. I live just right in the city, so I hear a lot of city sounds. But I'm lucky enough in the place that I live. There's a few trees around, and in the mornings I often hear the kookaburras, which are quite wonderful to listen to.
And Connie, if someone would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can email me, Henson, CHENSON, at learningquest.com.au.
And what parting advice would you like to leave us with today?
I guess, just when I think about the whole concept of fear and what to do with it, I think it kind of like the title of your podcast, it's fear not, it's embrace our fears. Fears are a natural and normal part of life. They tell us that things aren't right or that there might be something out there, and that's okay. We can embrace that and acknowledge it to ourselves and then decide what we want to do about it.
Great, that's excellent advice indeed. And I just want to let everybody know, too, that Connie has generously donated a year subscription to the Learning Quest Academy. And specifically, there is a Working with Change course that might be beneficial for people dealing with issues and fear. So if you'd like an opportunity to win that subscription, go to the giveaways page at livingbeyondyourfears.com to submit your free entry form today. And Connie, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and being so generous with your time and your knowledge.
Well, thank you, Ben. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.